Have you ever painted a room in your house? Recently, after a roof leak in our house, we had to repaint the entire room. Can I be honest? I hate painting. But it might not be for the reason you think. The actual rolling the paint on the walls actually is not the bad part. What nobody ever realizes is that preparing the room for paint takes as long as painting itself. Taping off all the trim, taping off all the edges, taking off all the electrical plates and light switch covers. It's tedious work, and let's just say patience might not be my forte. So have you ever been in a period of preparation in your life? It can seem like nothing is happening quickly enough. And yet, proper preparation is often the most critical piece of doing things well. Now, after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, we saw last week, God began preparing them for the journey ahead by giving them commandments and an explanation of the laws. These are found in the biblical books of Exodus and Leviticus, which all precede the book of Numbers. He also gave them instructions for the tabernacle, where is the place that he would reside. Now, here's a quick summary of some of the instructions that God gave his people. There were the Ten Commandments, which many of you have heard of. There are specifications for the clothing for the priests. There were instructions for building the altar, building the tabernacle, as well as the Ark of the Covenant. There was procedures for how to do offerings, purification for childbirth, skin diseases, contaminated houses, and so on. There were regulations for how to do celebrations and festivals, and warnings against eating blood, forbidden sexual practices, and breaking God's law of protection. Believe me, it's a riveting read. But it was all for one purpose. God was preparing the people. He was preparing them to live in community. And he was preparing them to be healthy so that they could ultimately multiply. As we open the book of Numbers this week, we find the Lord asking them to take stock of their resources. This meant counting all the people. Now, while the Hebrew name for this book of Scripture was in the wilderness, the English name Numbers came from the census that we find at the beginning of this book. Now, what they were counting was the number of fighting men, with some commenters counting over 1 million, and others suggested that it could have been more than 2 million. Even then, the women, the children, and older men, and all the Levites, they would never have been included in this particular count. The point is, there were a lot of people. They got that multiplication thing down. Now, many scholars doubt that Israel was ever really this large, but regardless of their number, God was preparing Israel to go and take the land he had promised for them. He wanted them to know their military strength and have everyone organized together. Now, God had already prepared the people by teaching them his laws, all of the regulations for worship, the ways to eat and prepare food, and the way to live life in community together. Now, he wanted them to see that a huge part of the preparation process involved realizing the value of people. See, in the past, the Israelites had focused on their lack. They complained about their leaders, their thirst, and the strength of their enemies. But God wanted them to see, going forward, that they had one another. But before the Israelites headed off for battle, before they ever marched one step or lifted one sword, the Lord wants them to understand one particular thing, that they had God. God wanted them to see the value of having one another. But more importantly, he wanted them to see the value of making God the center of everything they did. In chapter 2 of Numbers, it describes how the Israelites are to organize themselves when they march. It talks about them organizing in a square formation. This is meant to be recognized as an army formation, that the Israelites are an army marching through the wilderness. And it's this formation is also the same formation that the Egyptians were also to be using in battle. Now, according to an author, the Egyptian army under Ramesses II adopted this formation in camp. They camped in a square with the royal tent right in the center. And if you notice, the tabernacle, or the dwelling place of God, was placed in the very middle of their formation. The imagery is supposed to be clear. God was preparing his people to make it perfectly clear that the only way that they were ever going to make it on their journey was for God to be the center of it all. Now, the tabernacle in the center of God's people was to serve as a constant reminder that no matter what was to lay ahead, no matter what difficulties were to come, no matter what the challenges were that they were going to face, God would be with them throughout it all. So as we prepare for the journey that God is leading us toward, we also need to remember that a successful journey takes careful preparation. And even though preparation can seem slow, and it seems like we're not achieving very much, it is only through careful preparation that we'll ever be prepared for the journey ahead. So remember, as we prepare to move forward, God is reassuring us that we have everything that we need to be successful. He has surrounded us with an amazing community. He has blessed us beyond measure. But most importantly, he reminds us that he will be with us and be at the center of it all.